Today we find ourselves in Chapter 6, Section 1, and this is one of the bigger sections talking about a lot of the ideas of the roots of progressivism and how we're going to change society based off of all the changes that have happened since the Civil War, Reconstruction, and our Industrial Revolution. So the first thing I say is, what is a progressive? We hear this on the news constantly, the progressive agenda. And the best way to summarize it, it's the reformers that believed that the efforts of individuals and government could make society better and more fair. The period of time that we're going to talk about is going to be the time from 1877 to 1920. And what it's going to do is it's going to shape the modern idea of the roles of government as we see today. The rise of progressivism comes because there was a reaction to the laissez-faire economics and unregulated markets. Remember, we talked about in earlier chapters the idea of laissez-faire means let it be, let it be. So the government really didn't intervene with what they saw as problems. Unregulated markets also meant that there wasn't a lot of oversight by the government to make sure that industries were fair. Progressives believed that the industrialization and urbanization created social problems. We talked about in previous chapters when you're talking about lack of regulations, lack of rules, lack of laws in cities that affected the immigrant population and the working class people. The question that I want you to think about as we're discussing this, can markets fix poverty, filth, and crime of the working class man? And that's going to be something that we're going to discuss through the whole idea. So the one term that I'm really interested in is the term muckraker. Muckraker we're going to talk about, or you're going to read about in the book. It's a journalist who uncovers the abuses and the corruption in a society. This name was coined by the President Theodore Roosevelt because he perceived that these reporters had an obsession with scandal and corruption. And because they continued to report on all these scandals and corruption, it brought to mainstream the light of the plight of the working class man. Ida Tarbell and Charles Edward Russell exposed the corruption which was in large corporations. Jacob Briss, and he wrote a book called How the Other Half Lives, which talked about poverty and disease and crime, especially in New York City. And we're going to have a part of this whole chapter, of this section, where we're going to talk about Upton Sinclair and his book, The Jungle, which exposed all the bad treatment and unsanitary conditions in the meat packing industry. So a lot of these reporters are going to come out and they're going to press the issue, showing about the ills of society and how the average person was being mistreated. And what that's going to lead to is the average person jumping up and saying, how do we fix this? We need to fix this and make life better. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a different government reforms. We've talked about, again, for the last two chapters about party bosses and the political system. We wanted to find a way to fix the corruption in government. And we talked about after the Reconstruction period, we saw a lot of corruption in government. We talked about President Grant and the corruption in his office, in his administration. We talked about Boss Tweed in New York City, Tammany Hall. We knew there were a lot of problems. What did we have to do to fix it? Well, a couple things that are going to come out of this era are the direct primary. And what a direct primary is a vote that's held by members of a political party to decide their candidate for public office. So rather than having somebody pick somebody that they knew or have a hand-chosen candidate, we now go through a process in a direct primary where we're able to go through and say, this is who we want to have represent our group, going through that primary process. Other ideas in the political reformation process is going to be the idea of a referendum and recall elections. They happen still in many states today. So, for instance, in some states, if you don't like what your governor's doing, you have the ability to do a recall election. And each state has different rules about how they're going to do that. But if you don't believe the person is truly representing you or your goals, you're able to call up or recall an election. There's also the referendum, in which places can actually vote for the idea of solving a problem. Is there a good tactical way of doing things rather than just having a legislator create a law? Creating a referendum helps to say, this is what we want to do. This is how we have more direct democracy in a sense. Other parts that we're going to talk about, the 17th Amendment. 1913, progressives fought for the direct election of U.S. senators to stop the influence of those political machines. So we're talking about this in my government class too. The 17th Amendment is going to say, originally United States senators were supposed to just represent the states. The House of Representatives in Congress were supposed to represent the people. And what we see is we say, we need to be able to pick who is representing us because we want to have them share our views. If we have more direct representation in the Senate, then we're going to be able to see a way of fighting corruption. Obviously, this isn't going to fix everything, but it's going to be a good start to start getting the people on the side and start trusting their government.